I don't want to scare you. This is what I do when I start my meeting. I go like this. That means everybody has to be quiet. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting, March 30th, 2015, Milford Board of Education. If we could stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Kindergartners, you want to start us off? Okay.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Good job. Could let the record show first that Mr. DeGrego is ill and will not be at the meeting tonight. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Fieser to introduce our guests this evening.
Well, actually, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Mr. Smith, who is the principal of John F. Kennedy. And, you know, we said that each month we would want to try and highlight something instructional that's going on in the schools. And if we could highlight our students, our children, that would be fabulous. And so he wanted to bring two of his teachers and some of his students to come and really demonstrate how they are going about learning parts of their literacy curriculum. So I'm not going to go any further. I'll turn it to you, Mr. Smith.
Thanks, Dr. Fieser. Good evening, board members. I'll stand right here if that's okay so I can see everybody. Thank you for giving us the opportunity here tonight to share some of the terrific work that our students and our teachers have been doing at JFK in kindergarten in terms of writing. Our agenda tonight is simple. First, I'm going to recap for you some of the progressive work they've been doing for the last 2 years, very briefly. And then the kindergarten teachers, Ms. Stern and Ms. Slaslett, are going to share with you a recent lesson they did and a piece of student work. And the best part is after we do that, each of these kindergartners are going to come up and stand next to you guys and share a piece of their writing. And then you guys can ask them questions about their writing. Okay? So just to tell you where we've come from, kindergarten writing a couple of years ago consisted basically of letter formation and writing sentences. Now with the adoption of the Common Core, that changed quite a bit. Of course, letter formation and sentences are still an important part of teaching kindergarten writing, but in addition to that, the expectations rose. And kindergartners actually now have to write to a purpose. And they have to write to 3 specific purposes. One is opinion pieces they have to write. They also have to write informative pieces. And they also have to write narrative pieces. So that was a big change for everybody. Now, writing in kindergarten could mean writing the actual words, but it can also mean drawing a picture, or it can mean dictating your story to somebody, depending on where you are developmentally. So in order to meet the demands of the Common Core, all of us in Milford started a writer's workshop program a couple years ago. The workshop design and teaching is really a framework. If you think about an old-fashioned wood workshop where you have a master carpenter and you have apprentices working under him, and the apprentices are spending their time working on wood and the master carpenter is going around helping them with their craft, same idea in a writer's workshop. All these young people in front of you are aspiring authors, and our teachers are the professional writers that go around and help them as they refine their craft. The key is that the whole class lessons are very short and focused, and the students spend most of their time writing while the teachers guide them. So we started the workshop program by purchasing these materials called school-wide fundamentals, which my kindergarten teachers started using, and they were good. They were an improvement over what we were doing for sure. For one, they met the Common Core criteria of teaching to those 3 purposes I told you about. But my kindergarten teachers, being the consummate professionals they are, they wanted to do more. They wanted to take it further. So they talked to me about buying some materials to enhance the curriculum in the program. So we actually purchased some Lucy Calkins materials, and their work last year was to take the school-wide materials and the Lucy Calkins materials and fuse them into one superior program. And they did professional learning communities for the whole year where they were able to do that. And in addition to that, they did what we call the Critical Friends Group. Mrs. Laslett actually ran the Critical Friends group. She was the leader of that. And what that was is, so now they had the Common Core, they had our school-wide program, they had Lucy Hawkins program, and they had our instructional framework. So the goal was to improve the instruction. So what they did was, the Critical Friends group works like this. All 7 kindergarten teachers are part of the group. One of the teachers takes all his materials and tries to write a really high-quality lesson plan. All the group gets together and they critique the lesson plan on the spot. As they're critiquing it, the kindergarten teacher refines her lesson. Immediately after that meeting, they go into that kindergarten teacher's classroom, and the kindergarten teacher teaches the lesson to her students while the other teachers observe, and they watch how the kids are getting it. After they do that, they go back into a room, they meet again, and they reflect on the lesson, how effective and how successful it was. It's proven to be a really solid way to improve instruction. Like I said, Mrs. Laslett ran that last year, and it was terrific. So the end result of all that work has been some really solid kindergarten instruction at JFK in kindergarten, and the kids have benefited a great deal. So I'm going to ask Ms. Laslett just to share a little bit about one of the main lessons that developed the writing that you're going to see tonight.
Thank you. We're so excited to be here tonight to showcase the excellent writing that we do at JFK in kindergarten. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our authors share their amazing writing. As part of our writing curriculum, the boys and girls write narrative stories. And one of the narrative pieces that we work on each Monday is our weekend news. The boys and girls have to choose one thing that they did over the weekend and write a story about it. And our good writers know that a narrative piece of writing has some parts to it that they need to include. They know they have to include who they were with, what they were doing, where they were, and then they have to include a feeling, how they felt when they were doing that. So Mrs. Stern and I, we collaborated for this lesson. Before teaching the lesson, we decided that our children should use a writer's checklist to self-monitor their writing. The boys and girls were taught to use the checklist to make sure they included all the parts of narrative writing. We went over to Lucy Hawkins' units of study, and we found a great lesson to use. It was called Checklists That Can Help Writers Make Powerful Stories. So we added that lesson in here. When the boys and girls wrote their work, their writing, they then met with their writing partner. And together they looked critically to see if they included all of the details in their story. Some students found that they were missing some details, and they filled in their checklist accordingly. The following day, using a green editing pen, they went back and added the missing details to their story. Mrs. Stern is going to show you one of her student stories up on the dock camera. All right. So right back here, we have my friend Charlie, Charlie's writing piece. So if you look at the top part of his writing piece, you can see that it tells a story. He has characters, he's showing us where he is, you can see by the smiley faces that they're happy. So this is a great kindergarten picture here. He showed a lot of details in his narrative writing. So then we ask the students to make sure they can also put that in words. So to take what they've drawn and actually put it into words. So this is Charlie's story, the first day for his weekend news. I am building a snowman with my dad. It was hard to build because it was big. So this was the first piece that Charlie wrote, and he met with his partner afterwards. And he and his partner were given this checklist right here. And the checklist shows the 4 main parts that we're looking for in narrative writing. We're looking for who, where, what you're doing, and how you're feeling. So after talking with his partner and sharing the writing part of his work, they decided he told who he was with, his dad, him and his dad. They decided he wasn't showing where he was. He didn't say that in his writing. He showed it in his picture, but not in his writing. So he gave himself a frown face here. He said what he was doing. He was building a snowman, and he said how he was feeling. It was hard because it was so big. So that's telling us how he was feeling. So the next day, the authors got together with their green pen, and they looked back at their checklist. They reread what they wrote, and with their green pen, they added the missing part to their narrative story. So his missing part was where he was. I am outside with my dad. And his final piece now looks like this. This is his final story. It was typed up, and he has added details with his colored pencils and his Flair pen, because it is a published piece. So our author, Charlie, has written his narrative piece that he will be sharing with one of the board members.
Thanks, Mrs. Stern.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mrs. Laslett. One of the nice things about this lesson, that checklist, the teachers try to teach to the highly effective part of our instructional framework. And just for an example, sometimes with our youngest students in district, as talented as they are, teachers ask themselves, how can they meet some of this criteria? So one of the criteria is that students will independently monitor and self or peer assess to help set and achieve their individual learning goals. So the lesson that Mrs. Stern just shared with you accomplishes that highly effective piece with our youngest students in district. The children actually self-assess their own writing through that checklist and then make corrections to it. So finally, all authors write for a reason, and that is to publish their writing and share their writing, right? That's why we write, to share our writing with readers. And publishing can include a lot of things. It can include typing your story, illustrating, making a book of all the students' writing, put it on the internet. But ultimately, you want to share your writing. And to me, sharing your writing is like presenting a gift to someone, and it deserves to be celebrated. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have the students come up and stand next to you guys, and they're going to share their published piece of writing, and you can ask them any questions about their writing or their picture. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the students by name, and boys and girls, you can go to Mrs. Stern or Mrs. Laslett, whoever is your teacher, and they're going to tell you where to stand, okay? So, Sophia Bova, go see your teacher, hon. Alexa Bauer, Kaylin Cologne, Seamus Fedigan, Charlie Gombrowitz, Tyler Hoppick, Abby Miranda, Colin Sybeck, Tristan Robinson, and Kaya Sharma. Come on up here, Kaya.
What did you watch on TV? You watched on TV? I love it. I like it. This is pretty much. And you sled riding around? This is telling me it's getting dark. It's pretty awesome. Like you're right. You're very good reader.
Okay, boys and girls, thank you for sharing your writing with the members of the board and Dr. Fieser and Mr. Cummings and Mr. Richatelli and Mrs. Kelleher. I'm sure they appreciated it. I think you guys did a wonderful job on these pieces. So thank you very much. And I hope it was a nice break from some of the more intense things you guys are usually doing here at the meeting. I know I love reading all the kindergartners writing. I think it's wonderful. Mrs. Benetti wants to get a nice photo. Can all the boys and girls come around here in front and stand over here?
And if the board members could also kind of be behind the table so that I can stand up so I get everybody.
Do you want us all standing or should some of us sit?
Standing is probably good, but everybody's got to squish.
Squeeze, squeeze. Here, come over here, Jen.
Like a pancake.
We're up here.
Okay, come on
Why don't you guys get on?
Photo op.
I know, I did.
It's beautiful. It's going to be great.
Should have worn my tie too.
Sean in there. Is everyone ready? Nice big smiles, everyone. 1, 2, 3. We're going to keep going. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. And the moms and dads want some too.
Stay here, guys.
Now everybody say meatball. Cheeseburger.
Thank you, boys and girls. Round of a hand.
Thank you very much for visiting. So we'll wait a minute while the families collect their things if they'd like to go home and do their homework and stuff. Right into the homework. I'm sure they do have some.
See, they 10 hours of kindergarten. By the time you get to high school,
Go to bed. I guess they should be getting ready to go to bed, right? I have Miss Finnegan's son.
One year at a time.
Yes, yes. So yes, I thought it was. Oh, yeah, that was
Good to see you. I'm grabbing the wrong ones.
No, she put it.
That's my budget. She probably didn't.
In the house. That was cool.
I think what they're going to do is now the administrators are going to.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll laugh.
Miss Siddle and Mr. Smith are going to give a little voice.
I can do it if you want.
Sorry? Yep, I sure will.
Okay.
I got it, Mike. It's there. It's already up. I just minimized it.
What's that?
Thank you.
So we wanted to provide the board some context to the work. Mr. Smith did a wonderful job, I think, explaining the work that was going on at Kennedy School, particularly in the kindergarten around the writer's workshop. But I asked Ms. Sindel to come as well and present the writer's workshop against the framework of how we do literacy instruction in K-5. And so to give it some context to the work. Some of this is no doubt familiar to some of you who've been on the board for a while. But it's work that, as we've talked about in the past, is ongoing pursuit of improving our literacy instruction, primarily through the workshop model, certainly in K-5, and even as we talk, expanding it up into the middle schools and high schools. Ms. Siddle.
So thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Tough act to follow, but I gotta tell you, wouldn't give that up for anything. Just gorgeous. Such a wonderful and generous introduction. Seeing our beautiful kindergarten students so developed at this time of year, where they truly are emerging authors, and they're here to show you how serious and beautiful their work is, all in the same breath. There's nothing quite like the power of a kindergarten student. I think Mr. Smith did summarize the framework of workshop beautifully for you tonight. It's about building things. It's about building our understanding. It's about incorporating what we know about good reading and writing instruction, and really transferring ownership of learning from teacher-directed instruction to student ownership, and as you saw tonight beautifully, independent application. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit around our goals of Readers Writers Workshop and where it falls into our bigger context of a balanced literacy instructional model here for Milford Public Schools. To set our scene, we start with the experts. Irene Fontes and Gesu Pinnell have informed our work here in Milford significantly over the last few years, and they describe the literacy process as a system that is an integrated set of strategic actions by which readers extract and construct meanings from written language. In addition, we turn to the work of Dr. Lois Lanning, when she discusses the process of reading and writing. Students engage in literacy learning by reading text, thinking about text, listening to text, talking about text, responding to text, and producing text. So again, when we think about what students need to do and their role as a 21st century learner in a literacy-centered classroom, they are going to be asked to do all of these things all day, every day. When we talk about balanced literacy, there's a lot that happens during the course of a day. Elementary students are very, very busy. Balanced literacy at the core is surrounded by all of these different components that are masterfully woven together by our elementary school teachers. The The two that we're going to focus on this evening are Readers and Writers Workshop. But just to give you a sense of what the entire literacy programming looks like, it also includes some other important components that balance out both those foundational skills and also detailed, comprehensive, focused instruction that is tailored to individual student need. One thing when you begin is you have to know what you're looking for, and you have to know what students are able to do. So our teachers are constantly in a process of assessing our students. Assessments are given throughout the day. When we think assessment, sometimes our minds automatically go to a test. But we know now that assessment, especially formative assessment, is more of an action verb. It's what we're doing ongoing. We're formatively assessing children throughout the course of all of the components of balanced literacy. So teachers are going to gather evidence about where students are in their process of reading and writing throughout the course of the entire day. They're listening to their students' responses while they're doing whole group instruction. They're listening during small group work to see where students are falling in their continuum of skills and understanding. They're tailoring their individual conferences for students, because this is going to give you that one-to-one opportunity to directly instruct where a student falls, and constantly going back, assessing their own practice, thinking about what students need, what types of texts they need to be in, and what skills they need to be working on discretely within those texts. We also use some harder evidence, as we say, through our readers' notebooks, where students are responding to text and writing, also through our performance tasks and student writing samples, similar to what you saw here this evening. And then, of course, as you know, we have our common measures of assessment, which include the DRA2, running records, and also our curriculum-based assessments that are infused into our literacy curriculum. So again, back to the balance. How do we keep it all balanced? Well, the movement to shift to Readers and Writers Workshop has truly put students' needs at the center of instruction. So tonight we're going to speak a little bit about the main components of workshop. Because you hear, kids are in workshop, but what are they doing? What does that mean? Is there still direct instruction? The answer is yes, there is still direct instruction. And this happens through the course of all of the work that you're seeing out there. The stand and deliver model of instruction, kind of what I'm doing to you right now, is something that still needs to take place during the day, but we know now through research that that instruction is short, focused, 10 to 12 minute mini lessons where teachers focus on a targeted learning goal, deliver the instruction, and transfer the agency to the children so that they'll be able to practice independently in their own books. So we're going to take a walk through the different components of workshop tonight, and I'll ask for questions at the end, just so you know, just in case something's brewing for you, okay? So within the mini lesson, as I said, 10 to 12 minutes, teachers are going to model the teaching point. They may do some shared reading or shared writing where the teacher is writing or reading right along with students. Students are engaged in partner work where they may be retelling part of their story to a partner, asking questions about what they're hearing their teacher talk about, responding to a question that a teacher has asked, or stopping and jotting something on a Post-it as their teacher is showing them a model of the work. During the course of the mini lesson, the teacher will also review and clarify the main teaching point for students. They will link the work to an active engagement where students have the ability to try out their thinking right there during the mini lesson. Teachers can walk around and squat down and listen in while the students are they're talking about the main teaching point, and this gives teachers some more information about where they need to go next in the lesson. Students are then released to go work independently in their Just Right books and to focus in on maybe the lesson of that day or maybe a lesson of another day. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit around a teaching point and what students would be asked to do independently in their own books. So when we think about a teaching point or a student learning objective, and that might cue some prior knowledge for you, it's part of a sequence of skills or strategies that bring our students towards the learning expectation at the end of a unit of study. So throughout the course of each unit of study that teachers deliver and students participate in workshop, there are a set of learning goals that the expectation is students will show mastery towards by the end of the unit. So these teaching points are outlined in each unit of study, bringing students closer and closer to those learning goals. All of the learning tasks and the things that students are asked to engage in also go back to those bigger, higher order thinking goals. So for example, we know with the Common Core has come a shift to a higher expectation in elementary school around nonfiction. You know, we know informational text has become something that is just satiating us by storm. And we know that students are going to need to be able to think critically while they're met with all of these varied types of informational text. So for example, in grade 2, students may be asked to think about what was this part of the reading mostly about and how does it fit in with what I've learned so far. Or they may be asked to pay attention to the questions and ideas that are going through their brains as they read. So you can see that there are tones of metacognition along with direct instruction here, where students are thinking about their thinking throughout the process of this teaching point. What do I need to be thinking about when I'm reading? I need to be actively involved with this text. It's not enough just to kind of skim and look for key ideas and details. Instead, I really have to be considering what the author is trying to tell me. In grade 4, you'll see very serious work around theory and character development. You know, I can remember in school, they would ask, you know, well, who was your favorite character and can you tell us why? Now, 4th graders are being asked to develop theories around main characters, charting and monitoring the way that characters are changing over time, creating a theory about why a character may be behaving that way, and then, based on that theory, make predictions about what would happen next in a text. It's really concentrating on what's going on within the 4 corners of the text, staying within the text, as opposed to maybe thinking more outside to other types of connections. That gets us into that close reading component of the Common Core. So after a mini lesson, at the end, in Readers and Writers Workshop, students are asked to engage in this thinking independently. The whole goal of workshop, again, is to transfer that learning into independence for students, that they're able to apply this learning across different types of texts, in different situations, in different classes, and that they show mastery of these strategies and skills. So during Readers Workshop, they would be working in a Just Right book in their book bag, or their book bag. In Writers Workshop, they would continue to work and craft the pieces that they have in their writer's notebooks. So if you remember, when we talked a little bit about the teaching points, this may be an example of what students are asked to do during independent work attached to that grade 2 teaching strand. So after a student would sit and listen to their teacher would model their thinking with a book. She'd check in with her students to see how they're doing. Students would have an opportunity to be actively engaged. She would link it to something that she wanted them to work on independently, and off they go. And when they go, they're going to be looking at these informational text reading to see, you know, what strategies have I been using so far, and what do I need to do in order to get ready to retell this to my partner? It's always about thinking about what they're going to be doing with the text next. So it sets a purpose for their work as independent readers. They also may be stopping and jotting little question marks, exclamation points, something that's surprising or interesting about the text on a Post-it note, and putting it right in their informational book, so that when a teacher goes around and checks in to confer with students, they have an idea of what was surprising to students or interesting to students, and they know from that assessment how they're going to cue in to what students need to learn about next. Same thing in grade 4, students would jot their theories about what was happening with characters in the reader's notebook, or maybe on a Post-it note, and make a prediction in their independent reading text. A teacher could check in, make sure they know, is their theory strong? Do they have enough evidence in their text to know and be able to predict that that character is going to continue down this path? And they have an immediate entry point into a conversation with student around their independent work. There's such a power in conferring. When we think about how we have shifted our practices in literacy instruction, it really, again, has moved from the standard deliver to more of a guide on the side, facilitating coach of what kids need to read into or lean into with their thinking. So during a conference or a small group work or a guided reading lesson, whatever that small instructional practice is, a teacher would determine what next steps kids need to do, craft the lesson around that, and deliver that personalized instruction. So again, it allows us to move from whole group, highly rigorous teaching points with learning expectations to a more tailored, focused, individual, one-to-one, one-to-three, small group environment where we're really moving their thinking forward through text. Last but not least, you saw the power of the share tonight. You know, giving our students the opportunity to share their thinking, affirm their thinking, share their written work, share their wonderings. What's happening next? Is this a series I could really buy into? It gives us that creative energy that we need to truly create a community of readers and writers. And you can see here, we've got young authors. They are blossoming all over the district. The more choice and the more independent practice students feel ownership over, the higher the level of share. Teachers are able to tap in and say, Sue, I loved what you said. Can you share that with the group? Bring that thinking forward. It affirms Sue's work. It also gives the teacher the opportunity to reaffirm what the teaching point was. And again, it holds students accountable for what they were doing during that independent time. So hopefully, in this very brief overview of workshop, you're feeling what the benefits of this instructional model really are. We're getting to the heart of a reading and writing community. We're building classrooms where students feel comfortable asking questions about text. They feel comfortable taking chances in their writing. They're thoughtful, independent readers and writers. They're building empathy towards each other by becoming more active listeners, better speakers, being able to peer edit, being able to get feedback from each other. We're targeting what they need in that small group work, and we are motivating students ultimately by encouraging student choice, whether it's through the independent reading books or also through self-selected writing prompts that students complete. So that is where we are. Again, tough act to follow, but I'm hoping you're with me and you're feeling excited, because I don't know if you can tell that it's an incredible thing to walk into our classrooms in Milford and feel the pulse and feel the energy of these readers, writers, communities. So thank you. I'll open it up to questions.
Questions, Ms. Sennell? Yes, Ms. Federico?
I have a question. But first of all, thank you for the presentation, and your energy did come through even after the kindergartners. So, great job. But I have a question. It's kind of a two-part question. The first part is, how does it work when the students in the classroom are reading at different reading levels?
Mm-hmm.
And then is there anything that specifically addresses if students are a little bit behind grade reading level to bring them up? Does that happen here, or does that happen somewhere else?
Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at that balanced literacy model, I'm going to scooch back real fast. Is that okay? All right. It's like, okay. One of the most powerful components of this is that small group work. Within small group work, teachers have opportunity. Students can be grouped by where they are in their reading. If there's similar needs, you could do a small group that way. So it's more of a heterogeneous grouping around a level of text. You can address the needs in like a 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 size group. You could also focus in a small strategy group. So let's say it's not about a reading level, but it's just about something with writing. Maybe students aren't using as many sensory details as we would like to see. You could group kids together in that fashion as well. The biggest, most powerful opportunity here is having that sense of the flexible grouping to say, You need to know your students well. You need to take advantage of all of that assessment work that you're doing all day, every day, and you build those flexible groups and tailor that instruction to children.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's opportunities above and beyond classroom time for our exceptional learners that may need something different as well.
Okay. So that kind of work is happening outside the workshop in the small group work?
Yes, it's a part of the literacy block.
Okay.
And yeah, it's kind of, I see it in my mind as it's all kind of part of the workshop.
Okay,
it's all
sure.
part of balanced literacy.
Okay, yep,
Yeah,
sure.
but then there's the definition of workshop, which is the mini lesson, the conferring. It's more meta jargon, you know.
Okay.
But it's still part. It's all planned in tandem.
Okay.
Like you couldn't not consider it. It wouldn't make sense. You know, it's like picking out your shoes without picking out your jacket. Like they have to kind of go together.
Okay.
You know, that's the best fashion reference I have there.
Okay.
Okay.
And when you're pairing them up in the workshop, are levels taken into account, or does it
Yes,
matter?
absolutely.
Okay.
So, you know, again, it's so much about teachers knowing their students to say, okay, you know, if we've got someone, if it's a student with my level of chatter, you know, you might want to consider tempering that with a different level of chatter, or maybe it's the same level of chatter. It depends on the kid's needs. And also it depends on the purpose or the intent of what you're trying to get done that day. But again, it's all about balance. The key word here is balanced component of the literacy approach.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I have one question.
Yes, Dr. Goldbergen?
In the classroom, when the students are in these workshops, is there just one teacher working with the whole group of 22 students?
I would say it depends on the class. You know, we do have some classes here that are a co-taught model, so there are teachers that are in there sometimes working with students. But we also, principals work really hard to maximize their human capital and to disperse their reading intervention teachers to do more push-in support during the literacy blocks. So with that small group work, a lot of times a literacy interventionist will come into the classroom and help the teacher facilitate some of those small group work.
So for example, if you have, let's say, 5 or 6 students in the classroom that are really chatty or have some behavior issues, how is that addressed in terms of not distracting the other students that are trying to work independently? How do you
Great
handle
question.
that?
Early at the beginning of every year, we spend a significant amount of time in a launching unit, and what that does is it reinvests students in the process and protocols of workshop. Now again, if you've got a student with outlying behaviors that you have to work in tandem to support that student, whatever needs possible. But students come to workshop with a sense of, I'm part of this and I want to belong here and I want to invest myself in this work. So there's an expectation not only around the work that's done, but the process and the protocols around effective partner work. You know, those are carefully taught. We just don't expect kids to say, oh, well, I'm just going to saddle up to you now, we're going to have a conversation that's going to be completely on task and on topic. You know, that's modeled for students very carefully by teachers, and sometimes the teachers will say, you know, Jen, I had to take a step back. I feel like we're losing our stamina, they're losing their steam. So we got to take a step back and maybe take a look at what's happening with our process during workshop. And we may need to do a process mini lesson or two. Go for it, absolutely. You modify and adjust to meet the students' needs. So with that said, also, you know, I think the principals are very conscientious about how they work with their support staff in their building. So if something was presenting, it would be addressed at the building level. Okay? Okay.
I would say also that I'm no expert in elementary, but I'm always amazed at how masterful elementary teachers are with working with young children. I mean, it's astounding. That's not to suggest that sometimes it doesn't work, but they do come to know their children so well. And some of it is where they'll have a child sit. Some of it may be making sure that, you know, the text that the child is working in is going to pull that child into it. Some of it is also, you know, is giving a child 3 or 4 tasks that he or she has to do because that's going to keep them that much more focused. Some of it is who they might partner the person with who has a calming effect. I mean, it's just really pretty astounding to see. And again, sometimes there may be a child where none of those strategies work. So maybe there's some other supports that are needed. But it's really, when we talk about personalized learning in the literacy block, I mean, you see it to that level. You know, if you were to walk into any of the elementary classrooms, I mean, you're just going to see it because it is the process that Ms. Sinnell just outlined. I mean, you see that mini lesson, and then the kids go into independent reading, and you're kind of thinking, holy cow, how is this working? You know, you've got 15 or 17 kids doing independent reading, and meanwhile the teacher is over here meeting with 2 or 3. Well, the kids, they learn the routine. They learn that routine, and then you can go in, and I can go in, I'll walk into a classroom, and I'll go to the first student and say, so tell me about what are you reading? Why did you select that book? Well, where are you at in the book? The student will stop and start talking and engaging with me in terms of a conversation around the book. You know, or move it to another child. It's astounding, and I know that what we're seeing is that the kids are reading far more than they did in the old model. Mike, you have more expertise than I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I would simply echo what Ms. Sinnell and Dr. Fieser have said. I think that the benefit of workshop, and really why it is, I mentioned very briefly at the beginning, we're focusing tonight on the K-5 experience, but why we're looking at how it translates into the pre-K level and how it's going to translate into the middle and high school level is that it is a constructivist approach. Students are engaging in text, they're working with text, they're wrestling with text, and they're making meaning out of text. And as Ms. Sinnell said, it's really the text itself. There's so much more of a focus now on engaging in the writing and reading that's in front of them than there used to be in the past, where they could draw on a lot of things that, quite honestly, were more of a distraction and didn't challenge the thinking. And so this is why we see it as a benefit for beyond grade 5, because it truly keeps students engaged as they mature through the school system. And so as we prep them and invest in them and the learning and the experiential pieces of workshop, they're going to, and they're asking for that continual challenge as they go through middle school and high school. It's got great benefit.
Any other questions? I had a question. How long now have you been doing the Readers and Writers workshops?
This is that's my second year in Milford. This is our second year of fully implementing Readers Workshop. And then Writers Workshop was 2 years prior when school-wide came to town?
A year and a half maybe.
Okay, so approximately, I would feel safe to say three years. And again, continuing to bridge the connection between the reading and the writing through both curriculum topic and also through the protocols involved.
Very good.
I should mention too that as a instructional model, while it doesn't exactly mirror the math investigations approach, they're very similar in the sense that they both the literacy and math instruction approach we take in K-5 is a constructivist approach and asks students to engage, defend their thinking, share their thinking. The literacy and math instruction is mutually reinforcing for the students and the staff.
It's also, I think one of the things that's coming out of workshop is all the work that's being done now on teaching kids how to talk to one another about text, because it doesn't come automatically, and particularly for the youngest kids, their tendency is, if it was Mr. Riccitelli and I, he would talk, he finishes, I don't say a word about what he had to say, I just start sharing what I want to say. She isn't really talking.
It never happened.
But then teaching, I mean, from kindergarten on up, how do you move from that? And so teaching kids, so how do I raise a question? Or if I agree, they're even teaching kids at the youngest level to use hand signals. So if they agree with something, that they let them know that they agree, or if they disagree, or if they want to add to something that was said. And and so the kids get to know the hand signals, which helps them then remember what it is that they want to do. But what it's doing is it's really contributing to, we use the term discourse, but the kind of talk that kids are engaged in around text, and it's really helping kids again to go back into the text that they've either shared in terms of their reading or they're sharing because they're two different pieces, etc. And that, you know, the interesting thing is that's not something, we assume the kids know how to do that. We need to teach kids how to do it. We need to teach kids how to do it all the way on up. So I can say to you that 3 months ago I was on what's called a rounds visit. We visited a number of classrooms in Guilford. We went to the high school. We went to 8 different classrooms in the high school at Guilford. The focus, their instructional problem, discourse. Discourse among kids, high school kids. Are they engaged in authentic discourse that's higher level? Or is it pretty much, you know, kind of low level where they're just, you know, they're talking about the basic information that they're reading as opposed to really challenging one another with questions, with, you know, pushing back, offering new insights, etc. And that's what we were there to observe and give feedback to the high school staff there. So, you know, it's pretty interesting to see what kids are doing now that, well, I certainly never did, but wasn't done in most schools 10 years ago.
Okay. Any other questions? Excellent. Yes?
One short one. What percentage of books, say a second grader, are nonfiction?
Students are encouraged to have both types of books in their book bin or their book bag. There is, in second grade, for example, they have done a better job of balancing the narrative and the informational text, so they're looking at more of a 50-50 split. But again, some of the opportunity is to infuse some of the social studies text, some of the science text into some of the informational text work. So though I do believe we've made some great bounds into getting more informational text in the hands of students, we still have more opportunities to explore. Narrative is definitely something that was taught more, I think, predominantly before switching over to the Common Core. Now you're definitely going to see a better balance of the two. But approximately, I mean, 50-50 is what's recommended. And again, students have a mix of books, and teachers make sure that when they go shopping for books. When they go shopping for their books, that they have a mixed variety so that they continue the work that they need to do.
But if a student only wants to read narrative,
They're
encouraged.
They're guided and encouraged to the other end of the book selection, yes. You know, because you can't opt out of it. And teachers are really savvy about that. So informational text selection now is so much better than it used to be. I don't know if you remember the informational text that we used to read, but now there's some gorgeous books out there. So we're finding things that are interesting to kids. You know, we're providing a lot of different opportunities for them to really hone in on interest when it comes to informational text also. But teachers are definitely good about gently encouraging. Firmly encouraging. Definitely got to get that in your book bag now. You know, they're definitely, it's something that they think about more now than I think we ever have. Is that fair to say?
I would say also you see much more. If you walk into a classroom, you just see it. It's just there.
It's there. It's part of it.
You know, I'm immediately, I'm thinking of being in classrooms. I mean, there's a myriad of books around animals and fish and all kinds of species. You know, there's on space. You know, you could go into a 4th grade classroom and say, you walk up to school and say, what are you reading about? I'm reading about magicians. It's a non-fiction book about real magicians, you know, Harry Houdini or whatever it may be, you know, or I'm reading about, the Wright brothers, or the, you know, because they're interested in flight. I mean, so you just visually see so much more nonfiction than I ever remember seeing in classrooms. So kids are more they're prone to choose nonfiction, males and females, because females have a tendency, you know, to go toward the, and then they talk about it. You know, let me tell you about, you know, did you know this about a shark? Did you know about this? Did you know? I mean, and they're just talking about all that detailed information that they just read about it. In fact, I think the younger grades have a tendency to gravitate more to the nonfiction. The K1, I don't know about 2, but kindergarten, 1st grade.
Fascinating. The pictures are just amazing. So they're doing that, and you know, the units are written in a way that are balanced between fiction and nonfiction also, so the teaching points are balanced so that they're getting equal instruction in both.
I can remember my middle child, all he would read was nonfiction, and we would remember the struggles we had to find enough nonfiction in elementary school because they just, it wasn't there, and it was a real
It's just
struggle.
about that time that it started to emerge, but yeah.
Yep, and so he'd fit right in now.
You had Seymour Simon, like he was your go-to, you know?
Just a
Yes, Mr.
comment,
Wisseman.
I guess we've come a long way from the Dick and Jane books that I have.
Oh, yes, really. I remember those too.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that. I went to an exhibit in Grolier, the Grolier House, I think it's called, down in New York City a few months ago, and they had 100 of the best school books in the last century, and the Dick and Jane books were there. You know, I grew up with the Dick and Jane books. I know none of you are old enough for that. But anyways, but you look at that, and then you look what kids have in schools now, and as far as the reading, the richness of the reading is astounding. You know.
Mrs. Federico, you had another question?
And just one more, and I remember the Dick and Jane books as well. How long might we think it might take to expand this model to the middle school and high school? Is that?
Well, sure, you can talk to that.
I surely can talk to that. Okay. We've actually, since I came to Milford, we've been engaged in looking at our units of study in the middle school. So we're in the process of shifting to the model. Right now, teachers are really excited and totally fired up about getting book study and book clubs into the middle school classroom. So we're looking at more varied texts, we're looking at classroom libraries, we're looking at middle school readers and thinking about what they may need as far as text demands go. So I gotta say, to their credit, the middle school teachers have grabbed this and run with it. They're very passionate, they're very excited. I have an awesome group of curriculum team group that comes together, and we've really made some pretty big dents in the last year and a half. So hoping starting next year to get those units of study rolled out in full implementation, 6-8. We are organizing them through two different curriculum venues, one being a genre study component, where kids are really going to hone in on whether it's historical fiction or mystery, to really learn about the textual elements of those types of reads. And the other one is more of a concept-based approach, where we're looking at varied text, including informational text, video clips, you know, op-eds, whatever we need to get in there to have students start to synthesize across different types of texts to start to bring some higher level thinking and some critical conclusions about that type of work. So it's really, I'm pretty jazzed about that work too. So maybe that's the next time we get together. Maybe happy to talk to you about it. So it's really come a far way in a very short amount of time, and that's all about the teachers. And also the instructional coaches at the middle school level for literacy have been huge in helping move that work forward. So thank you for that also.
Okay. Any thoughts on high school?
You know, interestingly enough, I do have a thought or two about high school too. And again, so much we've been talking this year about, you know, there's an author by the name of Penny Kittle, and she wrote a book called Book Love. Doesn't get better than that, right? And in the beginning of her book, she has a call to action for English teachers, and she says, if it's not us who inspires the teenager to read, then who? You know, so we've been really thinking about that with our high school staff to say, if not English teachers to keep these kids reading and loving books, then who? You know, so we're also thinking about how to work in more elements of choice into the high school while still respecting the canon, because, you know, we want all students to graduate with an understanding of what literature, as we said, is, you know, but also within that, there's still some opportunity for choice. And how can we start to expand our thinking around the high school model as well? Okay. So, absolutely. It's going to be great.
Just to continue on that thought, we proceeded with the math investigations in a paced manner, partly because of the building blocks that you needed to move forward. You couldn't accelerate that beyond a certain point because you had to prepare the children to take the next step. But here in the literacy area, it sounds to me like you have an opportunity to accelerate this process and move it forward, because you don't have you might not have the same building blocks necessary to get into that. But so I was just asking, to what extent do you need to build, you know, the skill sets before you can get to the next stage? And there may be some dependencies there that might keep this from accelerating beyond a certain pace.
So it's rethinking the way that we're centering our instruction to student need. You know, when I was in school, we did a lot of whole class, whole text learning. You know, it was you had to read Animal Farm, and you had to, and don't read past chapter 4 because it might blow the ending. You know, so there was a lot of that thinking. It was a very traditional approach. Now what we're seeing is, you know, students are able to read a lot, and reading volume is one of the best indicators of reading success. You know, the research proves that the more kids read at a higher volume, the stronger they're going to be. I often describe it as like music lessons. You know, if you only show up for your lesson and you only play the piece that day and you never do the work in between, you're not going to be stronger. So they need to practice. They need to practice, practice, practice. And part of that is finding books that kids are going to love, that are still rigorous enough, that's going to give them an opportunity to really think and critique literature at a high school level. But I have to say, the teachers have been very open to starting to broaden our horizons a little bit and get these choices in for kids. It's been pretty awesome, actually. And knowing that that work is moving forward, they're seeing the kids, it's starting to pay forward, quite frankly, already. And kids are coming in with a heightened awareness of who they are as a reader and a writer. So that's going to help move what we need to do further faster. But I completely agree with you. We definitely have the momentum, you know. This is a science thing, but we definitely have the momentum behind it. We got to capitalize it, ride the crest, and just keep going. Absolutely. It's going to be great. Got great things going on in Milford.
Very good. I love your energy.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and all of your support. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. We're going to, tonight I'm going to present an addendum to the presentation that Dr. Fieser presented 3 weeks ago, I believe it was tonight. I was ill that night. Dr. Fieser happily, ably stepped in.
I don't know if it was happily.
Happily stepped in, ably, most importantly, ably stepped in and presented the mid-year data to you. And I know she was assisted by a number of the principals and supervisors. And I've asked the supervisors to be with me again tonight because there's certain pieces that I know that rose up in your questions that we really should address as a group. I think there's some base understandings that we should really try to address tonight and center our thinking around what the assessments are, what different types of assessment are in play here in terms of our discussion. So I want to start basically by reviewing a couple of pieces relatively quickly around questions you had. And if you think about it, there were three types of data presented 3 weeks ago. There was the DRA, which is the K-5 reading assessment, although we only talked about 1.5 at that point because K didn't do it in September, so we didn't have more mid-year growth on K. There was the NWA, and there was the District Common Assessments, or the DCA. So everything has an A in it. So we're going to present tonight the DRA and the NWA first, and then we're going to talk about the DCAs. And we'll probably spend more time tonight on the DCAs than we do the NWA and the DRA and the NWA. But just real high level here at this point. The DRA, the NWA, are similar assessments in that they are both measurements that are designed outside of the district. The NWA is a standardized measure, highly standardized measure, that's been implemented for over 20 years across this country and is referenced in a lot of states. And the DRA is a measure that, while not highly standardized, still relies on the person who gives it. It's a measure that was developed again outside of Milford, and it's a measure that's used across the country. So there's a commonality across the DRA and the NWA in that they exist outside of our school system. They've existed and they've been tweaked by outside professionals for quite a number of years. And they're they're summative type of assessments. They give us a point in time. So on the DRA and on the NWA, they tell us where the student is measured against peers and where they are in terms of the DRA, for example. Are they reading at grade level? On the NWA, are they completing math at grade level? Are they completing English language arts skills at grade level? That's in contrast to the district common assessments, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But the DRA and the NWA are united in those purposes. So we're going to go through those and try to address some of the questions that you had raised as a result of that presentation. So again, these are where the assessments are given. We talked about this 3 weeks ago. I want to point out while I've got this slide up that the district common assessments, one of the things that we struggle with, and this graph makes clear, is that, and this is not a current problem in Milford, this has been a problem, this isn't a problem in Milford actually, it's a problem all over the state, and quite honestly it's a problem in many states, but what you lack here clearly is a set of assessments that run through 612. Assessments that measure content knowledge, that are common, and that are standardized. For years in Connecticut, we had the CMT, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, English and math. In 8th grade, it also included science. We also had the 10th grade capped English and math, and the 10th grade science. But we didn't have measures that really went 6-12, nor did they cover the other subject areas. Contrast that with a state like New York, with the Regents, where their Regents exam is a content-based exam. Every student in New York takes the same exam. They're scored against by a large group. Some of it's machine scored, but there's also a set of readers who are calibrated. That's a different type of assessment than Connecticut has ever had, nor right now is on the horizon in Connecticut. So I just want to point out that a Regents exam in some ways is more like a DRA or an NWA compared to what our district common assessments are. And I'll talk about what we're in Milford working towards, while not creating our own set of regions, they're trying to create a similar type of assessment to a region content-based exam. So questions around the DRA. Again, the DRA, the board goal is around grades 2 and 5. The goal is to have 85 to 89% of students reach out of above goal in reading performance on the DRA. And the goal is to reduce the performance gap between special education and regular education students by 3 to 8 percentage points on the DRA in grades 2 and 5. So we're going to give you tonight grades 1 through 5. At the board's request, we pulled out on the all, what the board request was, from the all, pull out all students who are identified as special ed or all students who are identified as free and reduced. So we will do that, and I want to point out that new column for you in a second. If you look at this graph, and it'll be the same on all of them, this second column is the new column. So that second column is the column of all students, excluding those identified as special education and or free and reduced. And the green bar at the top, the lower part of that bar is set at the 85 percentile. So that is the board goal. So you can see at the winter benchmark here, and the DRA in grade 1, we're just shy of that 85% when we look at all students. And I'll go through these relatively quickly, but you'll see it in grade 2. We exceed the 85. Grade 3 is at 80. Grade 4 is at the 85 exactly. Grade 5, excuse me, is slightly below. So at your request, those are the numbers, and as you can see, those numbers represent, when we pull out the all, students who are not identified as special ed, students who are not identified as free and reduced lunch, we have strong performance on this. As we've talked about in the past, though, our concern is, and your second part of that goal was to reduce the gap, 3 to 8 percentage points between those students identified as special education and those students as identified as free and reduced. Because this is mid-year work, and we will be following up on this data in August or September, we'll be able to give you a fuller picture of how we've progressed towards those goals. And we'll build off these current slides to show you that change. Well, the other goal questions around grade 5 was why do gains seem to slow in grade 5 on the DRA2? And one of the things we handed out to you tonight was our assessment criteria for the DRA. And if you look at that in detail, you'll see it kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3. I think on the back it flips to grade 4 and 5. One of the things to point out, unlike the NWA, which has a clear interval system across all grades, K-12, so there's a certain amount of points. You get to, I think it's roughly 225 points, and over those 12 grades, 13 grades. The DRA2 is more problematic in its interval system. So, for example, in grade 1, there are 18 incremental reading measures increases that a student could exhibit growth on. Essentially, a student can enter kindergarten, grade 1, reading at a 0 or a 1, and possibly by the end of that grade can move all the way up to level 28. And as you can see, they're roughly marked out in intervals of 2. So there's a lot of change that can happen. You can measure growth more frequently across that measurement. So a student, in the course of 2 or 3 weeks' time in first grade, goes from a 4 to a 6 to an 8, maybe even jumps to a 12, depending on the reading instruction and their growth. Couple that interval system with the rapid physiological and mental growth that a first grader can exhibit. So to our experiences, we have first graders who over the course of 2 or 3 weeks can advance 3 or 4 levels very quickly, because all of a sudden it comes together and it gels perfectly. The brain is far more elastic, the brain is far more fluid, and so student growth can be far more accelerated at that level. I'm not saying anything negative about 5th graders and the plasticity of their minds, although as the parent of one, I sometimes wonder. But the DRA level in grade 5 is they enter at a 40, and the goal is to have them leave at a 50. There is no 42, 44, 46, 48. You begin at a 40, and we want to get you out at a 50. So while it's a 10-point difference in a sense, you're either at a 40 or you're at a 50. Okay, so you see it in grade 5, you're not going to see that, and coupled with the fact that 5th graders have kind of slowed in their growth. And the DRA and the fact that it has a 40 and a 50 to begin and end the year reflects that. So that change is not necessarily that it slows, it's just that the DRA expects less change over time as students mature through the grade levels. And DRA stops at the end of grade 5. It's not a grade 6 measure. So in a sense, even itself calls itself out of the DRA itself, takes itself out of the game as a measurement of growth at that point. One of the things that we're looking at, and you'll learn more about, I think, over the course of the summer, is because we've implemented a new reading assessment system in grade 8 this year that we're just trying out, we may push that back into the upper elementary grade and provide a better bridge for us to measure student change between grade 5, 6, 7, and 8. But that's one of the things we have to look at.
Mr. Rose has a question.
Just one question, Mr. Cummings. If a child doesn't reach level 50, which is what the objective coming out of grade 5, how do you know where they are when they leave grade 5? Do you know if they're 40? I'm just talking 42,
if they're at 40, for example?
Yeah, I mean, are they in the lower portion of the scale, are they mid portion of the scale, the upper portion of the scale? How do you measure them if it's either quote-unquote pass or fail?
Okay.
Kind of measurement.
A student at 40 at the end of grade 5 would be considered reading one grade level below?
Yes, because it's a full year below.
Okay.
So when you're looking at the 40 to the 50 on DRA, and you're looking at the way people are instructing text at that level, it's not, as Mr. Cummings said, it's not about the incremental growth, but it's within staying with that level and being able to go deeper into the text. So you're starting to think about some higher order thinking of process within a text. You're asking kids to do more, less just summarizing and more thinking about what they're reading and being more critical in their reading. So within that comes work. You know, there's a continuum of work that can be done between the 40 and the 50, and that's what the power of that small group work is, that teachers are constantly having those conversations with students to seeing where they need that support, whether it's around character development, or if it's around overall plot line, or if it's about, you know, key ideas and details, or if they're just not understanding tone or toward a theme. You know, there's it becomes more about not learning to read, but reading to learn, so it's more about the literature itself and what kids are able to bring to the table at that point.
So you're really measuring skill sets?
Processes, yes, within the reading process, yes.
So is there a number of, I'll use my term, skill sets, between 40 and 50? Is there 5 or 6, and then you know that they can do 3 or 4 of those concretely, and the other 1 or 2 they can't, and then, so when they're going to 6th grade, at least
yes,
there's a handoff from where the child is measured, as opposed to they're not at the 50.
They're just not there.
Yeah.
Right. I hear what you're saying.
So how do we transition that? And then, you know, does that also happen in, you know, from upper middle school, 8th grade to 9th grade? But we're just talking about this. But how do you ensure that that information?
Communicate that level of forward. One thing that we're talking about and has been past practice is that vertical transition between elementary to middle and then middle to high school, where they are meeting to discuss specific learning needs of students. So if you had a student that was presenting as needed further support in reading, that would be communicated staff to staff through a meeting and a conversation around what has been implemented that has worked for a student in that small group work and what next levels of the work might include for them as they move up to 6th grade.
In the analysis of the DRA, our teachers are trained to not only derive a number, but to determine what, to your point, what makes up that number, what are the strengths and weaknesses. And that profile of the reader, as it were, not only informs instruction in the current grade, but as they transition from 4 to 5 or from 5 to 6, as Ms. Siddle said, we actually hold face-to-face conversations. The data portal now also carries that information forward, so that, particularly as they get into middle school, and you know, the 5th grade teacher, the 6th grade English teacher may have met, but now as he goes to 6th grade, he's going to have a different teacher for science and a different teacher for math and for social studies. There's an expectation from our staff that they become aware of the profiles, because literacy is important in all those content areas. So it's not just important that the English teacher knows their strengths and weaknesses as a reader, it's important that every teacher knows their strengths.
So it's a less of a chance for them getting lost in the system.
That's right. And the same thing is true, and it's not as strong yet in 8 to 9, but that's one of the pieces that we're building as well. Particularly as we move to this new assessment system in the middle school, is now translating that for 9th grade teachers and how to inform their instructional practice.
Okay, thank you.
It goes back to what Ms. Sinnell was talking about, the workshop model. So rather than, again, having that whole group 9th grade instruction around a novel, while that's still part of a 9th grade curriculum, there's also opportunity here for book groups in 9th grade. And to the question earlier, you can start to differentiate your students by level of reading.
Thank you.
The question about the NWA, one of the questions was, how does the NWA assessment compare to international standards? Essentially, it's a process or a relationship such as this. The United States was really one of the last major powers in the world to develop a set of rigorous learning expectations that became known as the Common Core. But quite a number of other countries did initially. We know that a lot of European countries did. But certainly ones that became most famous were the English language arts standards that Alberta, Canada developed with Australia, and then the Singapore math standards, which became kind of the world leader in math standards. The Common Core was built to engage students at that level of expectation for English language arts and math. So it was meant to mirror those standards. And there are a number of studies that have been done to show how that mirroring has occurred over time. Separate and apart from the Common Core, because it's not part of the Common Core, wasn't part of the Common Core network, NWA revised its assessments to reflect the Common Core expectations. So the relationship really exists like this. There's, you know, there's in fact, in some way we could have probably represented those arrows as dotted arrows. But essentially, some of the countries, number of countries in the world developed rigorous learning expectations. Common Core was designed to mirror those rigorous learning expectations. And NWA is built to assess the Common Core. NWA is not an international benchmarking assessment. There is really only one of those, and that's the PISA assessment, which is given to students throughout the world, representative samples of students throughout the world. NWA is given across the country. It's given around the world, but it's given to American students who attend American MBC schools and American private schools throughout the world. So it's not an international assessment because it reflects the Common Core. I don't know if there's any questions about that.
Just to be clear, did the NWA exist before Common Core
Yes.
and then it was modified?
Yes.
Okay.
NWA has been around 20-something years. In 2012, it began to modify itself to the Common Core. All right, so let's talk about the district common assessments. And there's a couple pieces I want to talk about before we actually get into these slides. So as I said before, the DRA2, the NWA are more summative type assessments. They're assessments that are built outside the school district. They're assessments given to students throughout the country. The district common assessments are formative assessments. I'll talk about that, what that means a little bit more in a second. But they were built here in Milford. And were built within the last 18, 20 months. And they're in a process right now of being revised. They were built, I believe, as the board knows, they were something we were beginning to work on, but the urgency of beginning teacher evaluation and identifying teacher growth measures accelerated this. So what we had to do at that time is we had to create essentially at least one district common assessment for every teacher. For the K-5 teachers, it's the DRA2. But in 612, we had to create a district common assessment in at least one of the courses that all teachers were teaching. Now, we had a choice, quite honestly, at that point. The choice was that we could kind of rush through and get our first choice was actually we could buy something. But that would have hijacked our curriculum. That would have made sure that, that the assessments we were buying would have become our curriculum. And we had invested a lot of time, as the board knows, in developing our own curriculums. So that would have been the wrong choice. The other choice we had would have been to, quite honestly, develop these assessments very quickly and to get them done, but not to do them well. Unfortunately, we were in a position, because of the board 3 years ago putting in the instructional supervisor positions, we had the leadership and capacity, we had the leadership in this building and the capacity growing in our buildings among our teachers to really push for more rigorous assessments. And that's been our continual process since. So while that's been our work, is continuing to revise these assessments to reflect a high expectation for student learning. Unlike the DRA, which measures simply if a student is reading at grade level, or unlike the NWA, which again measures whether they're performing literacy or numeracy at grade level. The district common assessments are not about content. They're really about skills and processes. So they occur 3 times a year. You know, they occur September, January/February, and in May. But they're not 3 different versions of a content area test. They're 3 different versions of skills and processes assessments. And they're embedded in the curriculum at the time. So in 9th grade modern world history, that assessment takes place at the beginning unit of 9th grade modern world history, that first assessment. those skills and processes are measured again against the content of mid-year and measured again against the content of May. The through line is not the content. The through line is the skills and processes, as measured, as you'll see in a second, and as you, well, actually, you just saw 3 weeks ago, on the rubrics and the indicators. Okay, so that's an important point to keep in mind. These are growth measures. We're looking for student growth over time. I'll explain some of this in a little bit more detail in a second.
Yep.
Yep.
You said that the DCA is for 6 to 12?
Yes.
And K through 5 is NWEA and
The DRA.
DRA. Just hearing the explanation and definition of them, to me it seems that this seems much more of a better approach in how we measure students and their progress. If this is for skills and you know, from how they are grasping the ability to learn and you know, apply concepts, as opposed to, you know, saying that they're testing a certain score level or, you know, the reading or whatever. I mean, to me, this sounds like it's, especially if it's built in a lesson, it's done, you know, 3 times over a year.
Right.
It's easy to measure and keep them on point and be able to adjust the curriculum or adjust the focus based on where they are during that year.
And you know, I'll take a better assessment. I'll agree with you. But I think the other thing with it is you really want also a complementary assessment system. So you want a system that does this type of growth measure over time. But you also want to have an assessment system, which we're in the process of actually just beginning to build, which starts to measure student mastery of content. A true good student assessment system would, the pieces would complement each other and fit together well. So for example, what we've just started to do is start to build common finals, common final expectations in our high school courses, with the middle school courses to come next, so that we can start to measure how many students over time, for example, are earning a B on the U.S. history exam. And that will be, for the first time in the district, all students in U.S. history courses will be taking the same common exam. That's not happened before.
So really my question is, why wouldn't we do this starting at the lower grade?
I think it's
because we already have exam.
One, because the DRA currently exists, although that's in a state of flux. And because that is an appropriate measure for what we're looking at from a literacy perspective. Or I should say, put it better, having a literacy measure in K-5 is an appropriate measure. We do have math benchmark assessments, math common assessments that are given at the lower grades as well. And as we start to, Ms. Sinnel referenced the fact that we're looking to do a better job integrating our English language arts and science and social studies in grades 3, 4, and 5 in the coming years, we'll look for more common type of assessments there as well, particularly tied to these processes and skills. So, as Dr. Barbero can explain certainly better than I, but the work that he's done in the middle schools to establish students' readiness for the social studies expectations in the high school, that work can now drop down into the upper elementary grade as well. So you'll see more, in time, you're going to see more 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders working with primary sources and documents and making meaning of those documents than they're currently doing.
So maybe my question is, are you going to expand this to go lower grade?
Yeah.
That's really what I'm
yeah.
asking.
Yeah, we will.
And go away from the other current.
Well, again, I would say that you have to, I mean, the DRA is problematic for a couple of reasons, but we will always need some type of literacy measure. Because, I mean, fundamentally at the lower grades, job number 1 is teaching kids how to read. So you need a literacy measure that, you know, I spoke before, Ms. Sinnel spoke before of what the DRA 2 does to inform instruction. You need at least something that does that to inform literacy instruction. Because at that point, that's processes and skills as well. So I think that so you've got to have a supplemental system, and you've got to do so in such a way that the assessment is embedded in your work. It doesn't become assessment for assessment's sake. That's always the balancing piece. How much time are we spending in testing? And assessment is not bad if the results are used to make instruction better and it helps students learn. But if it's assessment just for assessment, then it becomes terribly problematic.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
You know.
The other thing, as you pointed out, Mr. DeRosa, one of the things that we should point out as well, the nice thing about processes and skills in a content area, well, they didn't necessarily be linked across grades, because that rubric applies, for example, to all students in the high school courses. You're able to measure growth across grade levels as well. And as we think ahead to where we want to go as a school system, starting to apply some of these to academic expectations for our graduates starts to set up nicely, because we can start to measure that growth over time.
Federico?
I just want to ask a question, or just for some clarification. I've asked questions before too about, how much are we testing and can we reduce some tests, and I, would certainly like to see anywhere that we can reduce time where children are spending, taking a standardized test, I think is a good thing. But wouldn't we always, the DCA is internal, so wouldn't we always want some kind of external benchmark in the district as well?
Again, you need a system that supplements each other. And you need, in a sense, and I say this, please, not that we're being dishonest, but you need a system that keeps you honest. So when you look at your district common assessments, we want to get to a point where we're able to measure that against, for example, the NWA. And do we see correlations between them? When the SBA results start coming, looking for correlations among those probably will take a couple years because that's a brand new assessment. But you're absolutely right. You want to be able to have your assessments give them. You need at least a couple different types of assessments to get you a more full picture of what student learns. Okay. And again, so much of that's related to processes and skills, and then the content piece as well.
Okay. And on the other hand, it seems like there are certain grade levels where there's some overlaps where they have 2, 3, maybe 4 assessments being given. So anywhere that we could.
Grade 11 right now is particularly problematic because it's got the SBA, and then it's going to, at the same time of common exams, and then many students are taking AP tests.
Okay.
So it's a little crowded right now in grade 11.
Okay.
The state has to help us out.
Okay. They're working on that.
Yes, they are. They're hard working on it. So, and I want to point out too that these tools, as Mr. DeRosa said, we did not have these in the district until a year and a half ago. In fact, the state, as I said, New York has the regions. Connecticut has never developed a corresponding assessment system. There's 169 school districts in the state. No doubt some of them are doing some work similar to us. No doubt some of them are not. But we're all on our own. So there is no way to kind of measure one town's progress against another's because there is no correlation. There's just none of, we're all working independently. It's the way, Connecticut for many years has existed. Just some background, as I talked about, I covered most of this. We started developing these in 13-14. They're given those 3 times a year. And again, I think the last 2 bullet points, they show student growth over a period of time, but they also reflect staff and district growth. So the other thing about these assessments that's important is we looked at them not just as a measure of how our students do, but we look at them as measures of how our staff are doing and how the district is doing. So what we're looking for is that growth over time. And I'll talk more about that in a second, but are we responding to what the assessment data is telling us? So what does the DCA measure and what does it show us? It measures how well curriculum is driving the development of certain skills in students. And these are just some examples of the rubric indicators that you saw 3 weeks ago, and some of them which are going to be presented tonight. It's a formative assessment, so it informs instruction. That's a cheap way to remember what formative means. It informs instruction. It's our expectation that when teachers get these assessments back, they look at these results, they're looking to align their instruction, improve their instruction. They see where gaps in learning are in their classes or in certain groups of kids. It's our expectation that they're going to change their instruction to make sure that those gaps get filled. That's why we're giving the assessments. Again, they show, because of this, they show teachers how students are progressing towards these skill sets. And again, they show them how to adjust class planning and instruction. I said this before, that these assessments are developed in-house. They're certainly not standardized. In fact, they are measured on rubrics. In those in-house rubrics that we have, I think do we have those to give out? Did we give those out? We did, okay. So you've already seen some of the rubrics that we passed out tonight. The rubrics complement the assessments. The teachers are trained to use the rubrics. But again, these are in-house measures, although I will say, I believe, yes, absolutely in writing, right, we use the SBA rubric, use the Common Core essentially. That one is not, that's a Common Core rubric that we train our teachers to use. Much as years ago, we trained our teachers to use the CMT rubric in measuring student writing. So, really what the DCAs are about, while they inform instruction during the course of the year, at the end of the year, we want to know, are students growing in mastery? So come June, have we seen the growth we anticipated over time in the course of a year? We want to know if students have achieved that growth, what went well? Why was it that they did well? What were our teachers, which teachers were showing greater success? What classes were showing greater success? What schools might have been showing greater success? And what were they doing and how did it get accomplished? How do you learn from success? It's a fundamental piece of this work. And I mentioned before, this reflects our teacher and student district growth. This is exactly what I was referring to. How do we inform and get better at our own work? And if they did not grow, if we're not seeing the growth we anticipated, and what do we look at? We look at, okay, what has to change in instruction? What might have to change in curriculum? Our materials have to change. We have to change our professional learning for our staff. Which of these factors need some influence? All right, the assessment questions asking the information we are seeking. Does the assessment accurately measure this curriculum skill set? We have to make sure that those assessments align to the learning objectives, the curricular objectives, the course objectives. So just because we not even knock an assessment out of the park, we have to always be making sure that that assessment measures what we want it to measure. And this is the work that takes place every June and July among teacher leaders in all the departments. It starts with the end of the year when the teachers look at their assessments and they prepare for their end of year goal meetings with their principals and administrators. And then the instructional supervisors become involved as they look at the results and they gather people together and they start to look at their assessments. And they make some decisions about the assessments as well as these other other influences on the assessment, on what's working and what's not working. One of the things we have to look at is an assessment need to be modified. And I want to be cautious here. One of the things we have to look at is just because 85% of the kids got the assessment doesn't mean it's necessarily a good assessment. Because one of the questions we always have to ask ourselves is, was the assessment too easy? So we have to always go back. Just that percentage has to be always examined. You can be very happy with success, but you always have to look at success to make sure that it's well earned. So we're going to go through some of the individual, we didn't break these out a lot by courses except for two examples. We've got an Algebra 1 example for you and a Chemistry example for you. And I can have Ms. Swanson talk about the Algebra 1 and Ms. LaSalle talk about Chemistry. But I just want to give you an overview using English of what we have here. In middle school, in English, you're going to see middle school is accumulated here in grades 6, 7, and 8. High school is English 1 and English 2. All right, so let's look at the middle school English. This is again 6, 7, 8. The question you asked was the percent of students with scores of three or more on the rubric. So we looked at these percentages. In the blue is the fall, the pink is the winter. The 5 titles to the columns are the 5 indicators on the rubric. And the dotted red line is the goal with that 85%. So this is again halfway through the year. With half a year to go. This is again an accumulation of all 3 middle school courses. And this is the high school, English 1, English 2. And again, what we're looking for is the percentage of students who are showing growth. And we're going to be looking at where that growth is occurring and ultimately ask the question, why is that growth occurring?
Mr. Cummings?
Yeah.
So these these are independent measures, correct? So there's no correlation between where a student leaves off at middle school and where they start in high school, correct?
Question.
Yes, Mr. Whiskeyman.
2 questions. One is, if you would elaborate a little on how do you calibrate your assessments in terms of as you had mentioned, you always have the question. So what kind of calibration methods are you using? And I don't know sure if it's possible or not, but I would be curious, and perhaps next year's mid-assessment you could do this. I'd like to see on these columns a continuation of the column in a dotted line that projects your projection of what your expectation is for the end of the year. So we can say, oh, well, we expect to make it on all these and might fall short on that one, and we're going to do this or that or the other thing to make sure we make the goal, because right now we're not expecting to make the goal.
Yeah.
That would be a kind of a thing that would give me a more of a sense of you have an understanding of where you are, you have an understanding of what you're projecting to be. Of course, that's partly a measure of how good a guesser you are about how things will turn out. And at the end of the year, we could say, well, this is what you expected, and this is what you actually did. So we could, if nothing else, know how well you are at guessing how things are going to come out. That would be a measure of how good a guesser you are.
Right.
But it would provide some sense of expectation of progress toward the end of the year, especially if there were problematic areas that you were concerned about.
Yeah, and there are problematic areas. I'll show you in a second. There are problematic areas we are concerned about. But I think, well, to your first question about the calibration, a lot of calibration right now happens at the district level, or it could happen things happen at a couple spots. Calibrations happen in the professional learning communities. We heard Mr. Smith talked about that a little bit earlier this evening when he talked about the writing workshops that the kindergarten teachers get together and planning lessons. So that's where calibrations happen. They've also started to take place recently at the elementary and middle school around the professional growth opportunity, which is part of the teacher evaluation. There also will be opportunities when curriculums get revised, or as the supervisors now, as we head into the last quarter of the year, start to look at what needs to be done this summer, making determinations around what are the priority curriculums that need to be revised, and at that point, are we going to make revisions to curriculum, also to the assessment, just to the rubric, and then we'll also, when those opportunities arise, as we start to identify those by priority area, we'd also bring teachers together to calibrate around that. The guessing. The guessing is informed by, as you know, Mr. Wisman, the historical, our past will inform our future. I'd be hesitant at this point, based on 2 years worth of data, particularly in some of these assessments have changed over 2 years, to start to make some types of guesses. When we looked at the NWA data 3 weeks ago, we looked at that projected growth. That's based on millions of pieces of information over the 20 years of NWA. We can begin to think about that, but it would require a statistical analysis that lies beyond my reach.
Well, that's why I
something
say
we should look at.
Perhaps next year's mid-assessment, you might be in a position where you could potentially do something along those lines.
I might be in a position to ask them to do that. So this is English. Now I want to turn our attention to math. One of the questions that you asked was the growth rate between English and math, and we'll get to that question in a second. But I'm going to ask Ms. Swanson to talk about math in a second. Let me just show you the chart. So the first chart is the middle school math. And again, excuse me, the red dotted line represents our expectation. And again, going back, this is what prompted your question. This is the middle school English language arts. So you can see how much closer they are to that red dotted line. And there's the math at the middle school. We'll talk about why that is in a second. But here's the high school. And the growth there clearly is different than in middle school. And we broke this out even a step further when we look at the high school, because we wanted to think about, this essentially is Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry. Sequence-wise, it's the Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. So we wanted to look at Algebra 2, or excuse me, Algebra 1. And this is the Algebra 1 class, which is primarily taken by freshmen. So I'm going to ask Ms. Swanson if she could just talk about, and you can go tell me which slide you want me to start with, but talk about what, here was the question. Why are mathematics scores so much lower than the English language arts scores? We talked about the focus, well, you start now.
Well, I think I'm just going to set a little bit of context with you that the changes that we're asking of our students in our common assessments are significantly higher than anything we have asked them to do in our traditional CAP sense. So when we did CAPT, we had a rubric that basically was completely got it maybe, but had maybe a calculation error, was on the way to getting it, but didn't quite get it, or had no idea how to do it. That was our rubric. That's it. Now we've taken the habits of mind, which we call the math practices, out of the Common Core standards, and we broke that out into the rubric that is part of what you have in front of you, and it's got 5 elements of it, and then 4 categories with each of them, those elements. So the shift in the types of tasks that would require kids to do all of these different pieces, look for patterns, make predictions, make decisions, justify their reasoning, the rigor here is a lot higher than what we had ever been asking ourselves to do in our instruction, and our students, therefore, to do. So we definitely, I think you can see by the data, that shift for us and our students is significant. And we're working together to identify resources, because we still have our traditional text primarily. And so our teachers, we spent a year talking about the practices, talking about different strategies to help students attain those. So instead of, when I went to school in math, it was more of an I do, we do, you do model. The teacher showed you how to do it, then maybe you did it together, and then you did a couple practice problems, you reviewed that, and then you went off and did your homework. That instruction doesn't support these practices here. It's much more about taking a look at those problems, looking at 2 problems next to each other. Do you see a pattern here? Can you jot down some ideas about, Jen was talking about all that literacy stuff, and I'm like, that's exactly what we're doing in mathematics. It's just using the number sentences, using a graph, looking at that graph, and the context changes all along. So we're really asking them to read, because it's all in context, to then write and use their mathematics, and the content shifts. So part of the caveat to math is, if I don't feel really strong in this area right now, so one of the examples is they have to look at a floor plan, and they have to make a floor plan, and if I don't really if I'm not strong with those skills, those very particular skills of perimeter area, it's gonna hinder my ability to then write and justify and go further along with it. So we are working really hard in our PLCs to identify support within our classroom, day-to-day instruction, and then taking these dipsticks. Like Mr. Cummings said, we had some choices a couple years ago. I chose the highest road possible, because this is where I want them to be, knowing that it would then inform what kind of work do we need to engage in. Because if I chose something that I was like, okay, we've got this, it would be in many ways deceiving to say, but we really don't have those really high order thinking skills where we're asking them to analyze and synthesize information given the math context. So I don't know what else to say, but that's probably why there's a big difference between the ELA, that there's a lot of shifts here. And particularly, one of the things I know when I was in class and I asked students to write and justify their answer, this is math, why do we have to write? And those habits we've definitely embedded in our K-5 program. It supports a lot of those processes, but we're working our way up. And while teachers are working hard to find those resources, in a traditional text, it didn't ask you to do that. So now we're working in PLCs to identify those resources that will help us instruct day to day using those strategies.
The simplest way to do this might be to take a look at the English language arts indicators. This is again for argumentative writing in the high school. And Jen, correct me if I'm getting any of these wrong. But language of vocabulary, conventions, elaboration of evidence, organization, and statement. Purpose and focus. So these are not new. People have been doing argumentative writing for a long time. These are primarily the 4 or 5 indicators that have always existed. Elaboration of evidence in Milford has always been the greatest struggle. We did best on the CMT when our students were able to provide the evidence to supplement their writing. So this is working from something that's very familiar not only to kids, but to teachers. When you go to math and you start to look at these,
Make sense and persevere.
yeah, I'm sorry, go back.
Make sense and persevere. See structure and generalizes, reasons and explains, models and uses tools, and attends to precision. And I have to tell you, just to find a task that's going to measure all of those things in one event, which could be a 60-minute block, and it might even be a performance task over a couple of days, that requires a lot of staff thought, because these are not just readily out there, and that's aligned to the curriculum and where we are in our learning. It's definitely a challenge for us to say yes, and sometimes we give a task and we say, well, we thought kids were going to see the model and use its tools within this task, but they didn't. They all kind of just went to the equation and nobody drew a diagram like we were hoping to, so therefore, what do we need to do instructionally? The question I always come back to is, so what are we going to change in our day-to-day instruction to encourage our students to show pieces of this evidence? Because it's not that they can't do it, it's that they're not necessarily just showing it to us. So in a day-to-day conversation guided by a teacher, they're giving you that information, but we're asking them the common questions. We have a student-friendly habits of mind to success of questions they should be asking themselves. Do I need to estimate or do I need to be exact here? Those are frequently things that a teacher will ask you when you engage in a task in a whole group, in a whole group setting of saying, okay, so you're going to look at this, and I want you guys to think about, do you need exact here? Is it okay to have 2.5 buses? Can you have 2.5 buses? Is that a possibility here? Really, there are a lot of questions we tend to ask our students but having them really have those metacognitive skills and think of all that on their own while engaging in a task. And we're basically dipsticking in to see how are we doing with that over the 3 events in the year for this particular.
Math simply has the longest journey. Math instruction is going the furthest over the changes imposed by the Common Core. And the journey is even longer for the students and staff who work right now in the 10th, 11th grade. Those students really are riding ahead of the Common Core, but yet they're impacted by the changes. Those teachers are ahead of the Common Core, but barely, but impacted by the changes. You see greater growth when you look at the middle school. Those students are coming up now from the elementary with it, but we also are continually changing our middle school curriculum to adapt to the shift that's happened. I mean, the middle school curriculum has shifted for the past 3 years as we get a wave of kids through. It's got to be responsive year after year. Math will get there, it's certainly going to get there, but again, it's got the longest journey, and we've, as Ms. Swanson said, we're not taking any shortcuts on that trip. Any questions about this?
Mr. DeRosa.
Can you go to the next slide for me, please? Knowing that we got to reach, the students have to reach 85% for those 5 different buckets, and this is mid-year. Maybe to piggyback off what Mr. Wiskman has said, what is the reality of us even doubling where we are today? And what I'm getting at is, first of all, these are 9 through 12th grade students?
No, these are 9 through 11.
9 through 11. So, to me, what this numbers show me is that we have, as a system, not armed our students with the skill sets as we're doing the lower grades. And what we're seeing now is that we may not have the time to arm them sufficiently so when they do graduate and they go into the next level, where are they short? And how do we get that information back? Because to me, it seems like we should be working overtime, spending more time at this level to make up some of the differences, because we've looking at the K through 5 and fill those holes, or filling them, because of available to Common Core and students per se, and the number of years we have to plan with them. But we don't have as much time right now to meet those needs for the high school. How can we accelerate the intervention to bring them up in the less than a lot of time? Because to me, that's what I'm hearing from students that are graduating and going into first year of college, and especially math, where they're struggling at the algebra level. And even to get through a remedial class of math at algebra level 1 is a struggle. So, and that's at a state university, not a private university. It's the Southern or UConn or Central Connecticut, whatever else. So how do we address that?
Well, I'm quite, not knowing the high school, the college expectations, but I think one of the things that, quite honestly, about the college expectations is they're not, in some ways, I don't know if we can make the argument that the college expectations around some of these things are higher than our expectations. And the reason I say that is they're not beholden to the changes imposed by the Common Core. They're not, there's an expectation around what students can know and be able to do, but that's really a content-driven piece, not necessarily around skills and processes. So I think and every university being different, I'm cautious in making those types of comparisons. I mean, we also know that, quite frankly, the colleges and universities see an opportunity to make some money out of making people go through a remedial program. I mean, that's what it's happening too. So I think we have to be cautious of that. To your question about what's being done here, and I was thinking the same thing as you said, if we were to make some type of projection around this. If you look at where we were in the fall and where we are now in the winter, we're showing strong growth. But we started out, fundamentally, we started out very low. The expectation would be, as we look at algebra, and again, working with ninth graders, that as each successive year happens, we're going to get that greater growth that we start to see because, one, the staff is in its second year of iteration with this type of work, and the students are more familiar with the expectations as they move up, because this is, again, the same type of expectations that they're having in the middle school. So there's a familiarity with this that's going to build success. Again, getting to when we start to think about 10th and 11th graders, well, one of the things that we're going to be talking about with you in the next coming months is how we're going to start to work with high school students around intervention programs. As we start to identify what those needs are, the board supported us with intervention specialists. At the high school level, we're defining in the process right now, defining what their work will be and how it will be organized. So those are pieces that we're at work with now to play catch up. But I would push back a little bit, Mr. DeRosa, because I don't think that it's really a question of, it's easy to look at this type of number and say, people aren't getting the job done. But as I said before, I think one of the things that what the job is actually still in process of being defined. And it's really difficult to get your job done if you're not quite sure what the expectation is. So while I don't disagree that we can do better, I do think that the work our teachers are doing, and the work primarily that our students are engaged in, is the right type of work, and we will get it. But again, we're working, it's the overused metaphor, but we're building this plane as we're flying.
No, I understand, and it's not that I'm negating the efforts and the work's being done in the classroom, but if we don't know what the post-high school expectations are, and we don't measure up or we don't parallel somewhere, or we don't make the connection, where if the objective of our school system is to promote them to the next level, the next level is a 2-year, 4-year college or a junior college. Mm-hmm. But if we don't know what those expectations are across the board, whether it's in this state or regionally or nationally, then how do we make that connection to ensure that we're setting them in the right direction? And surely that, just like we do from the elementary level to the middle school to the high school, and asking that question before transitioning from 5th to 6th or 8th to 9th, how do we do it from 12th to year one.
So I would say that that's where the Common Core state standards, the content standards, are aligned in what we are implementing 9, 10, 11, 12 with those. They were designed backwards for what are the college and career standards and designed backwards. But these aren't really the content. These are more the bigger skills that we want our children to have no matter what content they're dealing with. So it's hard to make the connection between the two, except that day-to-day content, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, graphing, you know, solving equations, those things are happening in every day. Teachers are assessing that. We have other assessments as well that are more content-driven. But for this purpose and for teachers' goal setting, we chose more skills that applied no matter what course you were teaching. Whether I was teaching algebra, we are all working on this. See, the unifier here is this about what we do. No matter what grade I'm teaching, and no matter which subject in mathematics I'm teaching, these skills are what we want our students to have built into their head, that when they're dealing with a problem, they're thinking about all these aspects of that problem. So it's one of the elements, as Mike said, or Mr. Cummings said, about the whole assessment suite really of what we do as a district to check in on the different aspects of the work that we engage in. And this is one of those check-ins really that puts the conversation that if we were all math teachers in the room, we could all converse about this, even though we were teaching different content about how are we helping our students, what kind of questions are we asking, what kind of tasks are we putting in front of kids that help them to engage in the practices, because it really was an embodiment of the 8 math practices that we squished into 5, because 5 is daunting enough, remember, from 1 to 5. And when I began this work, I couldn't find anyone out there that had designed a rubric in math around the practices or used a rubric. This is, I can't overemphasize how new and unique this is for us. It's becoming more commonplace, but even now when I try to find somebody else who may have done it, mine's stamped with a big draft, because that was our best estimate of what a rubric looks like in math instruction. That's a completely different world when, I don't know about you, but a lot of it was right and wrong. And I had some teachers, I had to work on giving kids partial credit for their thinking and not just a right or wrong answer, because it's really not, this isn't about the answer. This is about the process that kids are going through. So it's part of that long-term picture. And ironically enough, I was just at the new SAT coming out this morning, literally in Cheshire, at a meeting about how they're making changes to align, and the AccuPlacer, which is frequently used by colleges right now to help place students specifically in mathematics, that they're really updating that as well. And part of this work was also to ensure that our students are going to have to take a test as designated by the state that requires performance tasks. And these are the meatiest performance tasks I have ever seen in my entire life. And how can we assure that how can I assure, as the leader of the department, that we have examples of this work going on beyond what we typically did in math instruction? And that's why I chose this path for this work, along with all the other stuff.
Thank you.
This chart shows specifically what?
These are the 3 high school courses combined. This is Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2.
For all grades, 9 through 11?
9 through 11. And then this is just the breakout room.
Right, okay. That is obvious.
And what about the honors level classes? Are those kids included?
They're all included in that, in this. All right, so one of the things I mentioned quickly before, that I want to highlight here is the math. Thank you. The math. Each of these is a course level band. So there's a growth over time in Algebra 1, growth over time in Geometry, growth over time in Algebra 2. Some departments took a different approach and looked at multi-year bands. We did that in art and music. We looked at a grade 2 expectation, a grade 5 expectation, a grade 8 expectation, and a grade 12 expectation in art and music. Mrs. Sala did the same in science. We're going to look at science here. This is the middle school, again, combined 6th, 7th, and 8th. This is the rubric. But again, what students are working on here, and she can explain this better than I, is where they are at the end of grade 8, not necessarily where they are mid-year grade 6 or grade 7, remember mine, mid-year grade 6, grade 7. And then this is the high school. And again, this is going to be, I just want to make sure I reference it, biology, chemistry, and physics. So this is those 3 courses combined. And we broke out, in this case, chemistry. We broke out chemistry because one is almost over a quarter of our high school students right now are in chemistry. There's 500 students take chemistry. But we wanted to, again, show you one example of one course compared to the group as a whole. And I don't know, Ms. LaSalle, if you want to speak at all to what you're seeing on these charts in science.
I would just say, my first thing is, we just looked at math and ELA. Don't even try to compare the scores to the math and the ELA because the design of these assessments was completely different. I based my assessments on the NGSS practices. And if you look at the rubrics that I have, it's the scientific evidence-based explanation rubrics. It's for grades 6 to 8. This is based on a grade band standards. We don't have grade level standards for these practices. It's just a standard that says that by the end of grade 8, a student should be able to do these things. So technically, the way of reading this science one is you'd want all students to meet standard by the time they're in grade 8. If everybody was meeting standard at the end of grade 6, I'm in trouble. Actually, I'm looking at the scores right now. It's not looking too good. It's telling me that this isn't a lofty enough goal for us right now. Because if everybody starts meeting standard, right, and this includes 6th grade and 7th grade students, well, what are they going to work on for 7th grade and 8th grade when they come to it? So it's a totally different way of thinking about it. But again, it's based on the fact that the standards we have are grade band based, not grade level, and it's about growth. And I've told the teachers too, through this, it's more about students showing progress in their ability to construct evidence-based explanations in science over time. And again, to go to what Mrs. Swanson was saying, it's more of a skill-based. It's tasks that are embedded in the content over the course of the year, but this is not an assessment of their knowledge of specific science concepts in middle school. Does that make sense? For high school, is a different practice. There are 8 practices in science, and it is the next rubric, which is, this one actually says what the practice is, practice 3, planning and carrying out investigations. Again, the goal here is that students should be able to demonstrate that they meet standards by the time they finish grade 11. It's a grade 11 standard. This is a big task for students to be able to independently plan and carry out a valid scientific investigations. They start working on it in 9th grade, they continue working on 10th grade, and the goal is by the end of grade 11, a student should be able to demonstrate the ability to design and carry out a valid experiment. And what you see, like the scores kind of reflect, if you look, well, this one, this is the easiest piece. Do they have a goal for their investigation? That's kind of the piece that students more readily come to. The things that are more challenging are the variables, understanding experimental variables. Yes?
Is this chart showing us of all the 9th, 10th, and 11th graders total, this is the percentage of all of those students who are currently at this point meeting this level. So that includes the 9th graders who are already at level 3, the 10th graders who are already at level 3, as well as the 11th graders who are at level 3, score of 3 or more. So we could have some 9th graders who are blowing it away at 9th grade and already met the 11th grade standard.
Yes.
So, yeah, I struggle with this because I'm thinking we really want to have a sense of how are we doing so that at the 11th grade, how are the 11th graders doing? And without separately measuring the progress for the 9th and the 10th and the 11th graders, it's hard to see that progress toward completion by 11th grade, because buried in here are super achievers as well as those who may be struggling along the way. And so it's a little difficult from that perspective to see how you can judge. So how well are we doing toward actually meeting that goal?
Well, this next slide is 11th graders.
Well, it's tricky. Chemistry is really 10th, 11th, and 12th next. So, but if you had, what would be the true measure, you're right. If we could go through and pull out all the 11th graders and see what their scores are. But we haven't done that. So yes, this is a little bit better, but again, there's a lot of 10th graders in chemistry right now. We have a huge amount of sophomores in chemistry. You're right though. A more accurate measure would be able to look at, for science, grade 8 students, where are they? And grade 11 students, where are they? But there's value in looking at 6th and 7th as well, because it's about growing towards
I understand
meeting.
that, but without seeing the breakout by grade in the percentages, you don't observe that growth happening and how we, from a systemic standpoint, are moving ourselves forward toward achieving the ultimate goal. And it may be unnecessarily alarming to look at this and say, well, wow, we're way off the mark, when in fact, the ones who are not making it may be the 9th and 10th graders, and most of the 11th graders are already there, but we don't see that. So, so just from a board perspective, that's my perspective, that I'm struggling a little bit with understanding, so how well are we doing, you know? Because that's part of the question that we need to satisfy ourselves, that we're doing fine, but I'm not reassured by the nature of the graphs presented at this point in time. That's kind of where I'm.
One of the things that we struggle with in bringing this presentation forward is the depth of the data. So, you know, I think you spent, I wasn't here, but 3 weeks ago, a couple hours, and we're an hour and 15 minutes into this one. And we have not gone at the level of course-by-course data. And so that's one of the things that we've struggled with in trying to think about how to bring the data forward to you. And you know, quite honestly, when we think I'm thinking ahead already to the August-September presentation, which, as you know, also includes the AP results, a fuller examination of NWA and the DRA. And we're going to be going, you know, through all these courses. It becomes a multi-night event that I don't know if any of you are interested in attending, but that's essentially what we wind up having to face. So one of the things that we're having to face with is giving it to everyone is what might be a better way to present this data in a meaningful way. Because what you're saying is absolutely true. But we're always conscious of time and then the way it's presented. So we're in a process still of trying to find our way to the most acceptable measure.
Besides, I mean, you have to look at the data yourself and ask yourself the question, how are we doing? And am I on target?
And that's the work that the supervisors and teachers and administrators do. But you know, they don't necessarily present it obviously in such a way. They're looking actually at the
raw data.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
We're looking at from a perspective of growth, and in our meetings talking about, well, based on the results that we have, what do we need to do in instruction to help support students so that they are able to plan and carry out investigation? What structures are we putting in place on a regular basis in the classroom? How are they practicing this? How are they working towards that goal? But we do really generally talk a lot about how grade 8 and grade 11, the expectation is that their students would meet standard by the end of that.
Yeah. Finally, that, you know, ultimately part of our goal is to prepare our children for the next stage, for a job or for postgraduate education. And knowing how well we're doing at that, the rubber meets the road when the 12th graders go on after they graduate. You know, we can follow up and say, so how do they do, right? But still, as we approach that point, it would be more reassuring if we had a more sense of, you know, how are we doing? Are we really preparing them? Are they going to be ready? And it's just that I find this very interesting, but somehow not quite there, you know?
Dr. Goldorkin?
I think, like 3 weeks ago when I suggested we pull out the free or reduced lunch on the special ed students from all of the students, if you showed us the data separating out the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students, as well as biology, chemistry, and physics, I think that would be helpful. And then we will have all the data and we can take a look at that. I think when you group too many things together, then it makes it hard to understand what the data means. So it's a suggestion.
Other questions on this? Yes, Mrs. Federico?
I would just like to add, though, if the question is about, or the goal is about grade level, then I don't know if it makes more sense to break it out by subject, or if it makes it more sense to break it out by grade level.
It gets tricky with the high school sciences, though, because they don't necessarily, and I feel very strongly, students don't necessarily have to follow a specific path. And so you're getting mixed grades in courses. And you know, a student might not take chemistry or physics until they're a senior, until they feel that they're ready. But it's more important that they take it rather than they take it in a specific sequence at a particular time. So it gets tricky in the high school looking at grade levels because the course is so mixed.
Yeah, I guess I was just looking at it from the perspective, if the goal is a grade level based goal, then if we want to evaluate that, we need something based on the grade level.
Well, I think even just that idea, I mean, I would caution you that, you know, even as we're in the process of building these assessments, I don't know if we can say that 3 is a grade level goal. You know, I think that we have to be cautious. 3 is where this expectation, meeting expectation on the rubric, but we've not necessarily aligned that to a grade level goal, because as Ms. LaSalle said, or even if we look at some of those math courses, there's students, in Algebra 1, it's primarily 9th graders, but there could be 10th graders. But in Algebra 2, you could have 9th, 10th, 11th, and seniors. So one of the things we have to be cautious about is mixing the grade level across the course level, if that makes sense, or the course expectation. And then, as we said, in certain disciplines, it's different because of the way we're banding together certain grades.
Science standards tend to be banded. It's different. You know, when you look at elementary literacy and math, they'll say by end of grade 1, a student should be here. By end of grade 2, they should be here. With science, it's more, because it's kind of a suite of science concepts, it's more, most standards are grade banded. And especially the new standards that are going to be coming down the pipeline, they're very grade banded. So you just look about, you know, at the end of a grade band, what's their understanding about these skills, because this is really skill-based, and content. So it's different in different disciplines. But again, I think that one thing that might be helpful is just looking at grade 11 and grade 8 performance to see if you're tracking progress.
Thank you.
The last couple of areas we have are Dr. Barbero's, he's solely responsible for this. These are the charts for social studies, grades 6, 7, and 8, and then in high school it's modern world history and U.S. history. So this is the 6, 7, and 8. And as you can see, the thesis indicator for there is again almost at 85%. It's getting 3 grades mixed together. And then here is 9th and 10th, and again, excuse me, here's 9th and 10th. And you can see that there's, in a sense, there's a drop-off if you want to just pick that thesis indicator. But again, always a caution. These are, first of all, different assessments, different grades, different kids. And like we've seen before, even in math, student familiarity with process is best at the middle schools at this point. And it's as well as with the staff. That's where a lot of our work has been going on primarily. It's been happening at every level, but the greatest gains, I would say, at staff level and at the student level have been at the middle school across all the disciplines. So that's the social studies. And then the last one is world language. So grades 7 and 8 in middle school and high school is really a mix of Spanish 1 through 4, Latin 2, French 2, and French 3. So Latin 2 stands out there. We have a district common assessment right now in Latin 2. We don't have a district common assessment in Latin 1, 3, or 4. We don't have a district common assessment yet in French 1. These are things that are still in process of being built. But in Spanish, we have them all covered. So here's the middle school Spanish. And again, while you probably, none of us were subjected to a rubric or benefited from a rubric when we took Spanish in middle school or high school, these pretty much would have been the same indicators all along. Vocabulary, composition, grammar, and task completion. These are traditional world language indicators. So again, teachers are working from a place that's very familiar with them, to them. And then this is at the high school. And what's different here is some of these are more Spanish indicators, and I believe the last 3, discourse, mechanics, and language, are French. Correct. Yeah. So these are the Spanish indicators. These are the French last. Right. Any questions?
Mr. Sadi?
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, if you go to page 18, which is your social studies chart.
High school or middle?
Oh, this would be middle school?
Yeah.
And one thing, so we're not concentrating, but the number of students, so this one here indicates it's 1325 and 1324 on the bottom left.
Mm-hmm.
If you go over to page 14, which seems to be consistent, you've about 160 students for math higher. So why is there such a difference in the number of students?
You're back in math middle school?
Correct. That's on page 14. But the point is it's about 1439, 1432, whereas 1325, 1324, a substantial number of different students. Why?
At the middle school, there students who are, the current practice in the middle school, which is going to change next year, but the current practice in the middle school is for students who are struggling in English language arts, they will not take social studies. They get an extra dose of English language arts in the Read 180 program. So that would account for the difference. Those students are taking extra English language arts at this point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Goldworth?
Again, like, just following up with what Mr. Whiskey Man was saying before, if you could separate out the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students for social studies and 7th and 8th for the world languages, and also the different languages, I think that would be helpful.
Any other questions on this? Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda has to do with the policy, first reading, policy 6146, the graduation requirements. And we were going to take this up at the last meeting, but if you remember, we chose to put it off until this meeting just because the agenda was so full. Meanwhile, some of you had spoken to me about just a lot of redundancy in the policy that existed. So and part of that redundancy is because there's different expectations for different classes because of changes in the legislature, in all honesty. So what we did was that we went back through the policy and really streamlined it. So that's why we have a revised version that we brought forward to you. And so it's a much shall I say, it's a more reduced policy. Is that contradictory? Anyways, it's a reduced policy. And the piece you really want to zero in on it is the piece that's in yellow. That's all new language. And this is going to begin with the class of 2016 and beyond, so a year from now, this is what's going to apply, and this is because of all the new testing that's going to be coming in, that's going to be applying to the class of 2016. The kids who take the Smarter Balance assessment, the SBA this year, these standards will apply to them for graduation. And it's all around, you know, if they, how they have to demonstrate mastery in certain areas, and if they don't demonstrate mastery, then what the steps are that will be taken on the part of the school. When you, at 16th, you may want to say, well, is that piece, that expectation new? The answer is really no, from the point of view of that, even with the cap. It's not that kids had to pass the cap to graduate, but if they didn't meet goal on cap, then automatically what kicked in was that there were alternative assessments that kids would have to pass before they could get their diploma. For some kids, it may have meant taking another course. They had so many times in which to try to meet the standard. If they ultimately did not meet the standard, then they were not issued a diploma. So that piece of the law has not changed, but we've had to change the language because the assessment is changing. So that's the real difference here. And what's going to happen is that simultaneous to this occurring, the legislature is also re-looking at the secondary school reform legislation, which went into effect 4 years ago, but has been delayed year after year after year because it's going to cost districts a huge amount of money. This is the idea that every kid would have to take 25 credits to graduate, that they, you know, 2 years of a language, Algebra 2, there would be exams in certain courses, et cetera. All of that was put on hold. Well, they're taking it up again because the time is running out, and we're waiting to hear what's going to be the changes that are going to come forward from that, which then will have to be reflected in this policy. So right now, this policy is really written for the class of 2016. With the exception of on the front page, which that didn't change, there's changes in requirement in credits that have to be earned. But when we're talking about the performance standards for the class, we're talking about the class of 2016. If there's no change for the class of 2017, we'll make sure that that gets built in. But we anticipate a year from now there may be changes again. Some of those changes, excuse me, Mr. Risserman, some of those changes may be, and you may or may not have heard of this, so the SBAC is being, the Smarter Balance is being given to 11th graders, and now there's a huge movement on the part of some people, and actually the governor has raised this as a possibility. Are there other assessments that 11th graders could take in lieu of SBAC? So if a student takes, for example, the SAT in 11th grade and scores at a particular level, could that be used in lieu of Smarter Balance? If kids take an AP exam in AP course and exam in 11th grade, and they score 3, could that be used in lieu of Smarter Balance? That's all under consideration. No decisions have been made this year, straight Smarter Balance. But a year from now, it could be that there's different options for students to meet the standard, which would then prompt us to come back again with changes in this policy. So, Mr. Wiskerman, you had a question?
If a student under an existing, say, 2016 graduation schedule, comes up to graduate, falls short, doesn't graduate, takes a 5th year to graduate, is he now subject to 2017 and now has to make 25 credits, which is 2.5 credits more than he would have had before, and suddenly he's now burdened even further because he missed the first deadline? So if that's true, you know, there's going to be some students who are going to be considerably
So my response would be, but it is a really good question, is that it would depend upon what was the student missing. So for the sake of conversation, if we're not talking that they're missing credits, but instead they haven't met the standard, that's different than if they are missing credits, which would then move them into, say they're missing
they have even more credits to make up.
then they're literally not really a member of that class anymore.
Right, that's right. There's a whole set of, in a different policy, I apologize, I forget the number right now, it mentions, you know, the number of credits and the courses that students have to take to advance, and it's always English 1, 2, 3, or 4, for example. But I want to also point out, back when we first looked at raising the number of credits to 25, one of the things we did at the time, and this was back when we had a 7-period high school schedule, is we looked at the number of credits that students had been graduating with for the past 3 or 4 years. And 70% of our students were already graduating with 25 credits. And that was, again, before we implemented the 8-period day, which has only increased the number of credits that students are graduating with. So I think for a student who would be that significantly short by the time they got that gap between 2016 and 2017, there'd be an awful lot of other potential issues impacting them.
Yeah, okay. So you don't really anticipate, well, there can always be the unusual case,
Right.
sickness or whatever, that causes a student to miss a year or to just all of a sudden not quite, you know, be at the same level of performance and starts failing courses that you wouldn't have expected them to.
It's also a shorter span of time because the assessment's in the 11th grade, whereas CAP was in the 10th grade, so you had 2 full years in which to meet that standard.
Okay, well, it was just at this point just a curiosity, although I think from an administrative standpoint, you would look at things on a case-by-case basis and make adjustments as they may be necessary on the individual basis.
Right, if we had a student out for an extended period of time due to illness, we'd be providing homebound tutoring, so that child would not be falling behind.
Yeah. You would hope so anyway. Depends, you know.
So I had a couple of questions on page 3 of 6, the number 1 at the top, the last sentence. The student's response will show knowledge of the conventions of standard written English, and in this way shall demonstrate mastery on a locally administered SBA-like Smarter Balanced Assessments writing exam. I didn't understand that. So this is if they haven't demonstrated mastery in writing.
So they will have to demonstrate it on a locally developed Smarter Balance-like writing exam that has yet to be developed.
Okay. So, I mean, first it says that they will, the way I read this was that in order to demonstrate mastery, if they had not done so, they will have to, prior to the completion of their senior year, respond critically in writing to a question based on the reading of one or more literary blah, blah, blah. And that response will show knowledge of the conventions of standard written English language. The way I read this would be that response would be used to determine if he had or had not shown mastery.
The written response would show whether or not the student had.
Correct. So the written response on a question based on the reading of one or more literary, informed, or persuasive text, or based on his readings, studies, and experiences. So I didn't take that as being a Smarter Balance-like assessment. I took that as being a separate entity that I just found this confusing.
Okay, so I'm realizing what you're saying, because at the top it says they'll respond critically in writing to a question based on.
Correct.
And then at the bottom it says they'll demonstrate mastery on a locally administered SBA-like writing exam.
Correct.
So what we can do is get clarification on that.
Right. And then under implementation C at the bottom, number 1, I was wondering if you can give me your rationale for the 5 opportunities over the course of their senior year. giving them 5 chances to.
That is really based on historical practice, although we said we have 1 less year to do it. I think currently we allowed, it's capped, I think it was 6. But one of the considerations that we're taking with this first class of 2016 is that the assessment itself is an unknown. And as we develop the SBA-like assessments this summer, once we see the SBAC and we were able to respond to it, our expectation is that it's going to be a tough mountain for some kids to climb, and that we should give them multiple opportunities out of fairness.
So that's a fair number? Seems like a lot.
Well, that's what we've done in the past, and I will say to you, and one of the things, and we've started to have a conversation with the high school principals, we have to look at, given that it's only a year, and 5 is a lot to do in a year, one of the things we have to look at is some alternate means of perhaps providing those assessments. So we just out of a kind of a off-the-cuff conversation, do we look at some Saturday practice sessions and then giving the assessments on Saturdays, for example? Because we've just got to alternate the what we've done in the past.
All right.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Mike?
Sure.
You said when you get SBAC results back,
When they see the SBAC test.
When we see the SBAC test.
What it looks like.
So
the current, the one that's coming up.
Yeah, yes, you've seen the kind of released items, but actually what we want to see is when students actually take the assessment, we're going to have people looking over their shoulders to see what kind of questions actually are. And so if we're going to develop an SBA-like assessment, while we have the release items, we'd also like to see more current items that are actually on the test. Now, we won't copy them. We're not going to take pictures of the assessment. But it would get us a sense kind of how they're constructed, time frames, how long do they have to take them, those types of things. So we could start to build some models.
And then the other question I had was on page 4 of 6. So number 3, under notification, the guidance department will notify in writing the parents of juniors who did not meet the SBA goal. So when will the results be in for the juniors that take the SBAC?
Our understanding is July.
So they'll be seniors at that point.
Technically, they are seniors. Right? They'd be rising seniors.
So I'm wondering if you can somehow. So I think one of the things I had mentioned last time was that in number 2 spoke to, it's labeled students, and then it says that the parents will also be contacted. So I think if you have, it might make more sense to frame this as what will happen for students and what will happen for parents.
Well, if we made seniors consistent in all 3 paragraphs. Yeah.
Then you don't need to have, I would think in part 2, you don't need to have any mention of parents if that refers to students. That's referring to guidance department will write to the student who don't meet. You don't really need, and the parents and their parents. So number 3 will take care of that. Yeah, I didn't think you were going to have the results back before school ended, so. Are there any other questions, Mr. Sadi?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to the administration. I'm going back to number 3. I have the same question you did as number 1, while the 5 came in. That's been answered, but take a look at 2, 3, and 4. You talk about an intervention class. Why would you not want to put in there something that if you're going to give 3 additional tests after the 2, that there be another graded step? That if you now have don't pass the 3rd or 4th, there might be something more, or a second intervention class, excuse me.
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I think we had that, in the past that's been the implication, that they get the additional support until they pass. So it's, now again, based on the time frame we're dealing with, that class could be constructed as a the 12th grade math class, for example, that many of them take. It's short, its acronym just right now escapes me, I apologize. But it also could be that we look at some type of a short-term intervention on a Saturday basis and they take it. But that's what we've done in the past. Until they pass, they're required to get the additional assistance in a course.
Well, I mean, being nitpicking, you said there's only going to be a class, and then they basically get 3 chances to not pass. If they don't, what happens? You don't do anything about it.
No, yeah, and that's, in practicality, that's not what happens. They're not in a sense released, so we can make that more clear, but they're not released until they actually pass the assessment.
So the intervention kicks in after 2 times, and then it will continue, is what you're saying.
And then I also had the same question, Madam Chair, too, on page 4-6, parents. I had the question, which was answered about when that test comes in, but do we need to be more inclusive in the language? So if it's parents or guardians, if we're going to have notification, and we want to develop a policy that's clear who the notification goes to, that, and then what do we do with, and I don't know how many, if you have them, but emancipated students? Do we have any?
We do. We will, every year we have some emancipated students.
So, should be parents, guardian, however we word it, so anybody that's responsible for the student.
Well, if they're emancipated, we'd be notifying the students.
I said emancipated, but, for example, what happens if they're over 18? Who has to be notified?
Just the student then.
Just the student, right?
Unless, only if they're emancipated.
Well,
if they're 18, over 18, we still notify the parents in the school system, unless they're emancipated.
Okay, I mean, my thought was, it shouldn't be just using the word parent, because there may be others that are supporting them, responsible for their care, their housekeeping, whatever it is, living arrangements.
Generally speaking, when we notify, we always, well, I can't guarantee this, but generally we put dear parents and guardians of students in the Milford Public Schools or whoever it may be. I mean, that's who we address it to. So we certainly can do that, but if a student is 18 years of age or 19 years of age, they're still with us, we notify the parents. Because parents have a right to still be notified while they're in, unless the kids are emancipated.
Thank you.
Other questions on this, Mrs. Federico?
Just going back, all the way back to page 2, under section A, demonstration of mastery, where we're talking about a student must achieve at least a proficient score on the Connecticut State Department of Education designated assessment. Is that where that is intended to be the SBAC until it's something else?
Well, it's the smarter balance. That's
okay.
Right. That's what this all applies to. Is
okay.
Smarter balance.
Okay.
And then also meeting the graduation standard for the Milford Public Schools.
Okay. So I think that's where it was a little confusing, like we talked about before, because the smarter balance is mentioned by name as one of the exemptions, but it's not mentioned by name as the original assessment that you would have to pass.
Under the demonstration of mastery?
Yeah.
Yeah, we thought it was covered when we said on the Connecticut State Department of Education designated assessment, which
okay.
happens to be smarter balance.
Okay.
So, I mean, we certainly can put in there. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, seeing none, this will be coming back to us for a second reading and action at our business meeting next Monday, which, don't forget, next Monday's our business meeting.
Next Monday?
Yes.
2 weeks.
It's coming.
No,
it's next Monday. Next Monday, because of vacation.
Oh.
Can you explain that to everybody?
What?
What you just said.
Oh, no.
Please do, because
it's confusing. We have our business meeting is next Monday, because the following week is vacation. So April 6th, it's been on Dr. Fieser's Friday updates mentioned.
I knew, I just want to make sure everyone.
Everybody knows, April 6th, okay. We have no more public, so
I second the motion to adjourn.
I'm not going to read public comment statement. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We are adjourned. So April 6th. So I personally, I'm finding this month very